Okay, so good afternoon everyone. I was tasked to discuss 21st century assessment in education. The 21st century bordered international schools or universities to cope up with the crucial global demands set for education. So Einstein said, we cannot solve problems using the same kind of thinking that we used when we created them. As applied to education, we cannot educate today's children using the same methods we used yesterday because our present generation is really different from our generation. First, let us define what is educational assessment. It is the process of gathering evidence of what the student knows, understand, and be able to do. But the question is it really important to have an assessment? So the answer is yes, because assessment plays an important role in the process of learning and motivation. And reminder, a well-designed assessment methods provides valuable information to our students' learning because it tells us what the student learned, how well they learned it, and where they struggled. So the difference between assessment and evaluation lies within the intent of use. The purpose of assessment is to increase quality. That is why it is important for us to have formative assessment rather than pure summative assessment because we need to assess if they have learned something after we discuss the topic. While the purpose of evaluation is to judge the quality. So for example, at the end of the grading period or at the end of the semester, for those who are teaching in college, we're going to evaluate if our learners are ready to go on the next level or not. So we can say that 21st century assessment will be part of a larger system that supports students' learning and is incorporated at all levels. So these are the general principles of assessment. The first principle is measures all learning skills or outcomes. So learning outcomes are statements that describes the knowledge or skills students should acquire by the end of a particular assignment, class, course, or program and help students understand why that knowledge and those skills will be useful to them. The next principle is cover all the learning tasks. So for every topic that we are going to discuss, there is a corresponding activity so that we can assess our learners. Those tasks is based on our topic and learning outcomes. So for our third principle, use appropriate method. But how can we say that it is the appropriate method? So the methods of assessment that we're going to use will depend on the outcome that we wanted to assess. Like for example, we want to assess the cognitive aspect of our learners. So we can use written response instruments such as essay, narrative, or we can also use the oral questioning. But if we want to assess their skill, competencies, and abilities, we can use performance tests, observation, or self-report. What if we wanted to assess their output, their product, or projects? So in this case, we can use product rating scales, or that is the close-ended feedback, or the rubrics, or the criteria for judging. So for our fourth principle, make it valid and reliable. So when we say reliability, it is the extent to which the outcomes are consistent when experiment is repeated more than once. And validity is the extent to which the instruments that are used in the experiment measure exactly what you want them to measure. Remember, a valid test is always reliable, but reliable test is not necessarily valid. For P principle, use the result to improve learning. Okay, so like for example, if our student got failing grades, they will strive hard next time. Or for example, their score is average or below average. They will work hard, especially to those competitive learners. Okay, so for number 6 principles, assessment should be communicated. Because it is much better if our learners are aware about the assessment. We need to explain to them the goals and the objectives or the reason behind that assessment. For number 7 principles, assessment should be used multiple methods. Assessment continuum should include variety of strategies. Students should be able to demonstrate knowledge and skills through relevant tasks, projects, and performances. Because like for instance, in one classroom, we have 35 to 40 learners. And those learners have different intelligences. So see to it that as an educator, we don't only focus on one way of assessing their learnings. Number 8, blending of formative and summative assessment. Formative and summative assessment are both ways to assess. They are both need to use to evaluate student effectively. They are both can be used for student feedbacks, and they are also both assist in future lesson planning. So the difference between formative and summative assessment. So in formative assessment, it helps students to learn and practice. And it is usually done throughout the course. It identifies gaps and improve learning. So it is done via approaches that support specific student needs, while summative assessment assess student performance. It is usually done at the end of instructional period. So why do we have to do this? To collect evidence of student knowledge, skills, or proficiency. And how are we going to do this? So by exit learning products or cumulative assessment. And the last principles is assessment must be meaningful, relevant, and supportive of long-term success in 21st century. Okay, all 21st century skills initiative must focus on the following. Number 1, core academic subject mastery. A student who can think critically and communicate effectively must build on a base of core academic subject knowledge. All 21st century skills can and should be taught in the context of the core academic subjects. Second is 21st century skills outcome. Schools and academic institutions really plays a big part in the success of our nation. But the question is, are schools helping our students to become critical thinker? Are they helping our student to become problem solver? Or a good communicator? Or a good collaborator perhaps? As an educator, it is also our responsibility to teach them and become literate in information and technology. So teach them also to become flexible and adaptable, innovative and creative, financially literate. Teaching all those things will help them to become a globally competent. There are lots of ways on how we are going to assess our learners. These are some of the 21st century assessment strategies. So first is performance-based assessment. Performance-based assessment is a direct and systematic observation of the actual performance of the learners based on a predetermined performance criteria according to Simaro 2003 and Gabuyo 2012. So it requires students to construct a response, create a product, or demonstrate the application of knowledge in authentic contexts. So how are we going to develop this? So these are the following steps in developing performance-based assessment. So first, we have to define the purpose of assessment. Because we're not doing this just because we wanted to. There should always be a reason in doing this assessment. So we have to explain to our student what are those purpose. And then number 2, we have to determine skills, learning outcomes, and the taxonomy level. And then after that, we have to design activity or performance tasks. So after designing that activity task, we are going to develop scoring rubrics. And the last step is assess the performance. So next is portfolio assessment. Portfolio assessment is a systematic collection of student work created in response to specific known instructional objectives. A portfolio can include classwork, artistic pieces, photographs, and variety of other media, all demonstrating the concepts that you have mastered. Each item that is selected to go in the portfolio is chosen within the parameter of the purpose of the portfolio itself. So many teachers require their students to write a reflection that correlates with each piece in the portfolio. This practice is advantageous for the student as they self-assess their work and may set goals to improve. So these are the following steps in portfolio. First, we have to decide on the portfolio's purpose. Second, decide who will determine the portfolio's content. For number 3, we have to establish a criteria to determine the portfolio's content. And then we have to determine how the portfolio will be organized and how the entries will be presented. And for number 5, we have to determine when and how the portfolio will be evaluated. And the last one is decide how the evaluation of the portfolio's content will be used. Okay, so we also have the scoring rubrics. Rubrics is a scoring guide used to evaluate the quality of students' constructed responses, or it is a set of criteria for grading assignments. Descriptive scoring schemes that are developed by teachers to guide in the analysis of the products, processes, or performance of the learners. So we also have the holistics and analytic rubrics. So what is the difference between the two? So holistic rubrics consist of a single scale with all criteria to be included in the evaluation being considered together. So with holistic rubrics, the rater assign a single score, usually 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 point scale, based on overall judgment of the student work. While analytic rubrics feature a grid of criteria and levels of achievement, the instructor assigns points or weights to a particular criteria and then evaluates the student performance in each area. Student benefits from receiving rubrics because they learn about their relative strength and weaknesses. So these are examples of holistic rubrics. So there are basically reasons for using rubrics. So intentionally, we are using rubrics to focus instructions. Descriptively, we are using rubrics to guide feedback. Objectively, we are using rubrics to characterize desired result. And this is an example of analytic rubrics. So again, to continue, we are using rubrics for some reasons. So purposely, we use rubrics to operationalize performance standards or to check the quality. Constantly, we use rubrics to develop self-assessment and competence. And then thoughtfully, we use rubrics to involve students and to quantify quality. Next is observation. Observational assessment involves obtaining evaluative information through direct observation. Although observational assessment could potentially be used in any domain, they most often are used for behavior, social emotional functioning, and language. In observation, teacher can use formal or informal observation to assess student understanding to use in 21st century skills. Observation can be subjective or may be combined with the checklist or rubrics. So next is the concept maps. So these are visual representation of information. So this map can take the forms of charts, graphic organizers, tables, flowcharts, Venn diagrams, timelines, or T-charts. These are especially useful for students who learn better visually, although they can benefit any type of learner. So this is an example of concept map. Concept map is a powerful study strategy because they help us to see the big picture. By starting with higher level concepts, concept maps help you chunk information based on meaningful connections. Or in other words, knowing the big picture makes detail more significant and easier to remember. Next is the self-assessment or reflection. It is the act or process of analyzing and evaluating oneself or one's action. Self-assessment provides students with an opportunity to self-evaluate or make judgment about their learning process and products of learning based on criteria that they have agreed on with their instructor. Why are self-assessment a useful tool? Because it helps students judge their own abilities and performance and become self-regulated learners. And self-assessment skills will help them in their professional careers after they graduate by teaching them to regulate their own performance. Another is peer review. It is the evaluation of student work by one or more classmates in a mutual exchange. It functions as a form of feedback when students are in the early stages of development for a project or paper. It also allows students to give and receive feedback on an assignment before submitting it to the instructor. But reminder, it is important to make students aware of the importance of non-judgmental peer review and to make it a regular part of the learning process. So this is an example of a simple peer review. So we also have checklists. It is an assessment tools that set out specific criteria, which educators and students may use to gauge skill development or progress. So this is an example of a checklist. Checklists are more functional and contain a list of essential targets and desired outcomes. They can be used while the students are in the process of learning or on the completion of the activity. We also have logs. Logs help students track their works towards a target. They can be used by both teachers and students to show progress towards a benchmark. So another example of logs. Like for example, a student assembling an electronic portfolio may track its own progress. They set schedules and post messages to other students. It's their way of monitoring. It's like progress report. For my last slides, the changing role of a teacher. So the teachers are facilitators of learning. The focus of a 21st century teacher is on the student by developing higher order of thinking skills, effective communication, collaboration, and other skills that they need in the 21st century. The teachers must develop new teaching strategies that they are radically different. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.